Well, doing business in Africa has proven to be a complex journey. It involves navigating 54 different countries, each with its own legislative, governance and language identities, as well as vastly different socio-economic contexts. With the wealth, then, of natural resources, why is doing business in South Africa, or Africa as a whole, often described as challenging? We're joined now by Rutendo Huindingwi, author of Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for coming in. I hope I didn't do too badly on pronouncing your surname.
No, you did perfectly, Temikile. Thank you for having me on your news today. Really excited to be with you, man.
You've written on the subject. First things first, is doing business in Africa really as difficult and as complex as we are told that it is often?
Look, it's not unnaturally complex. I think, the success or the mistake that people make in terms of doing business in Africa is taking for granted that as Africa is a component of 54 countries, 54 people groups, and sometimes people want to homogenize that as opposed to appreciating the heterogeneity of it in terms of it's unique, it's complex, and once you appreciate that, it helps you navigate more realistically as opposed to thinking it's just one big block with the same grace all across the continent.
And is the global community waking up to that? I mean, when you speak to people from Europe and Africa, there are still misconceptions that we are all one thing and like the same things even.
So I think people, some are, some are not, and I guess that's where there's a gap, because when I was writing the book, my publisher specifically asked me, do you have an audience for your book? And I said, look, I do have an audience for the book. It's to guide and stimulate and create a catalytic effect in terms of encourage people in terms of how to do business in Africa correctly. It's not the panacea of a solution for Africa. In other words, I don't solve all of Africa's problem, but hopefully I give some sort of guidance in terms of my own experience, and as well as drawing from the big fight that happened here in 1974 in Africa between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali, as well as a bit of desktop research. So a combination of those three reflects on my own experience having done business in Africa in the last 20 years in 20 different countries, at least. I hope that will give some sort of good perspective in terms of how to do business on the continent.
And why a boxing match as sort of a metaphor for Africa, business and the rest of the world?
First and foremost, I'm ashamed to say this, I'm not a boxer. So when I do wear those gloves, I'm kind of faking it to make it. But
aren't we all?
That makes two of us, so I feel so much better. But I think more importantly is that the fight itself, the Muhammad Ali-George Foreman fight, in 1974 in Zaire, the present-day DRC, was quite unique. The world had never seen a fight of that nature before in a continent. 60,000 people came. Mobutu Sese Seko was the dictator of Zaire. So it had all these different, unique components that made up the fight. And I thought, gosh, in summary, when people look at Africa from a first world, looking into Africa with its challenges and opportunities as well, it just highlights the complexities, but at the same time, the opportunity, as well as the beauty, because that fight has gone down historically as something unique and actually amplified Africa as a destination. So that was a part and parcel of the reason. I came across it by accident. I'd been doing a keynote to multinationals around that topic and even do master classes along the same. But that's where it originated from. And I just said, let me infuse this with my own experience to give it a more realistic angle. And the rest is history, and Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded came to birth.
And what were the main or the core observations, especially when you began to revisit your other work and we're now looking at the current context and putting together a book? I mean, with the fight analogy, for example, talk about boxing, I wonder to what extent Africa is fighting against itself for business instead of collaborating, despite all the differences across 55 countries. 54 countries.
According to the AU, it's 55. According to the UN, it's 54. But that's a discussion
for another day.
For another day, typically. But I think, coming back to your point, I think what it did highlight with regards to Africa is, I was in a session this morning where I said Africa's GDP is 3% of global GDP. And you ask yourself, why do we sometimes go through the fights and the conflict when there's a 97% global GDP that is out there? In other words, there's much more wealth outside Africa than in Africa. And ideally, we want to position ourselves in Africa to tap into that wealth as opposed to just tapping into the 3%. So I think going back to your question and answering it a bit more accurately, it was just to, I did my PhD, but if anything, I learned from the PhD is what you don't know as opposed to what you know. And out of that, it was just to highlight the fact that there's so much more opportunity out there that we can leverage off our strengths based here in Africa. And there's sort of 5 key points that I highlighted in my book, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, that align to that, which obviously I'll unpack later on. But that was the heart and soul of it.
And you also speak about how Africa, for example, has such vast areas of arable land. We are mineral rich, yet that's not reflected in the socio-economic context of the majority of the continent's people. Why has that been so slow, despite the very clear interest from even multinationals in coming to do very lucrative business here?
I think it's converting the resources we have into wealth, and that's two different things. You can have resources, but you don't have wealth. And I think that's one of the things I also want to stimulate in terms of provoking thought in my book, in that we've got mineral resources, we've got agriculture, and I guess that's where your Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has got quite a big relevance in regards to say, guys, we have to industrialize. You know, we've got the natural resources, we've got the land, but are we converting that to wealth? And the way that happens is by industrialization, manufacturing. And COVID kind of gave us a wake-up call, because when we realized, gosh, we need medicines, but we can't manufacture them. And we then put a strong hand on the table with people like, the vaccination producers, the vaccine producers, and said, guys, we need to produce in Africa. We know it's not viable just to produce for ourselves, but produce for the rest of the world. Even if 10% is required for us, let's do that. And I think that's why the whole element of saying, let's position ourselves to tap into the global economic ecosystem of wealth, but at the same time addressing the local requirements.
And have things changed as far as countries with money basically wanting to dictate the flow of the relationships? I mean, I'll give you a recent example. When Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, was in Pretoria a few months ago, one of the things that he was saying was that they want an equal partnership. But is equal really equal in the world of business when one has money and one has resources?
Capitalism will never be equal, but capitalism will always empower a competitive environment. And Antony Blinken, now followed by Kamala Harris, she's just come down. And the other good example, just add on to that, President Macron from France, since he's been president, he's done 18 trips to Africa. So it kind of tells you, if somebody is leaving France with all that beautiful champagne to come to the continent, there must be something here. The Americans are coming here. Even with our problems, there must be something here. So if anything, I always turn that discussion on a different level, and I say, you know what, there must be something that we have with regards to opportunity. The guys are coming here because they see the opportunity. The question is, are we seeing the opportunity and capitalizing in the same way that they see it? So it's more or less a confirmation in terms of saying we've got something that's great, but what are we? And I believe it's happening, you know, whether it's Rwanda, Ethiopia, I know it's gone through its challenges. If you look in Egypt, everybody's beginning to say, guys, there is a way of converting this resources to wealth, but let us be more smart about it. It's a process that's going to take time.
And who are the leaders of the African continent currently in terms of everything that the continent aspires to as far as economic prosperity? I mean, we've spoken a lot about the size of the South African and the Nigerian economies, but you look at the flow of international activity to Kenya, for instance, even in broadcasting, people are taking their hubs there. You look at interest around Egypt and where it's positioned.
So, and again, I think that's again highlights the heterogeneity of Africa in terms of it's not one place. Rwanda is the case in example, a very small country, but great influence. Kagame obviously has been driving the whole concept of Continental Free Trade Agreement. Egypt is another growing place as well. They are doing major investments in tourism. We go to Kenya, the same story. Yes, in terms of quantum size, Nigeria and South Africa are always big, but if year-on-year growth, you can see from a GDP perspective, is not as strong as we want it to be. There are 54. So and that's the point. There are 54 countries at different levels, but I think the success is each of those countries realize their own unique strength and bringing that to the party and saying, how can we create an ecosystem of collective strength to grow as a continental economy? And that's where the hope in the future is for Africa.
I'll give you a promo moment now because you've written on the subject and ask you, as per your findings and detailed in the book, how do we take ourselves to the next level?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string? There's no simple answer to that. What I usually advise people is saying that, is the easiest level is take country by country. But leadership is going to be key. 2050, 40% of the world's youth is going to be in Africa. Hopefully you and I will still be in that category.
20?
50.
Oh, okay. I will not confirm or deny whether I'll still be eligible.
If wishes were horses. But pick it up from there. But my point is that we're going to have a strong skill set of young people who are ambitious. There are not going to be enough jobs, no matter how many we create to absorb their skill sets here. That means you're going to have to create skills that are available into the global economy. And that, for me, that kind of mindset and thinking is a paradigm shift, as opposed to say, let's create jobs for the guys to stick in here and end up producing here. So to answer your question more specifically is to say, let's create a leadership mentality, not just for the old people, but even for the younger generation, and empower them to take and leave a legacy that will equip them to make this continent successful, not just for the sake of Africa, but from a global impact perspective.
Dr. Rotendo Huindingwi, thank you so much for coming in today to speak to us on Newsroom Africa.
Thank you for having me, Tambikile.